أول طلب جزاكم خير.
Merci. Thank you for being here. I would like to begin by thanking the staff of Layla Tazi. I think the staff of this festival deserves a lot of respect. I would also want to thank Liz and Neila and Andre for the invitation, for allowing me to be back to Morocco. I want to start by saying that I'm a historical anthropologist. I've been working on the Jews of Morocco, Christians, Baha'is, Shias for the last, I would say, 23 years. But what's interesting for me as a historical anthropologist begins in Tata. As a child, we grew up hearing that we are people who sell seeds, Molin Zari'a. We are Kisalas in Casablanca, which was a sense of pride for us. That's how we earned our living. That was our cash money. So that's how we were able to buy what we need. That allowed us as families to dig wells, to continue in subsistence farming. So that's where I come from. I interviewed my dad at the end of the 1990s until the early 2000s. And I remember one day, after spending 2 years in the US, I was sitting with him and some members of the village, and then somebody said, well, Harطاني. And then my father intervened. The first time I heard him saying that, he said, my son is not a Harطاني, my seeds are in the US now. I think personally that's, from his perspective, I think that's, in terms of identity politics, that's what it mattered to him, because it's something that's always been at the back of his mind. And that's what I want to start by saying two things. First of all, why studying Jews for me? It's a Fanonian moment for me. It's a liberating moment. The study of Jews allowed me, as a black Moroccan from the south, who was able to attend and get an education at Al University, who opened my mind and perspective to a lot of things, to think about diversity. But to think about diversity in a very critical way. To talk about taboos. To talk about the place of Jews, the place of blacks, to talk about the place of Jews, the place of blacks, the place of Baha'is. There was a huge conversation about the Baha'is that Abdelaziz Bilal was part of, that Alal Fassi was part of, that Rita Gbera was part of. It was a very interesting moment in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And I think we have regressed a little bit from that. We are not allowing ourselves to dare to be courageous at the universities, in the public sphere, to talk about these questions, because that's what a multicultural identity is part of. And I think by allowing ourselves not to discuss these questions, I think we're also being involved in what I call the Unf, okay? The violence, or the violence of silence. This is the violence of silence. I think for us as a nation allows us to, in some way or another, to marginalize other groups. And so for me to do this in a place like an American university, but also engage with public Moroccan institutions, is also a moment to have to open, to start this conversation as a scholar of minorities in Morocco. But it's a conversation that I think cannot be done through terminologies that come from the West, from America, or from Europe. We have our own terminology, we have our own discourse, we have our own words to think about that. And for me, the model is two individuals that, unfortunately, we don't talk a lot about their work. Mukhtar Susi and Mohammed Dawood. One from the south, one from the north. And I think we have to revisit their work. We have to think about, there is schools that are indigenous, traditional schools of talking about difference, which are empathetic, which recognize the others, which in some way dance around issues given the fact that they're dealing with politics. They were still able, Mukhtar Susi was still able to talk about slaves, but in his own time. Muhammad Dawood talked about Jews from the north coming from Spain. And by revisiting these traditional schools, for me, it allowed me also to anchor the work that I'm doing in the US, engaging with American scholars, engaging with other scholars, to also have this conversation, because this meeting of words, this meeting of concepts is important for us to think about these issues. The last point I want to talk about is how you expand the taboos. You talked about silence. Silence the range. It makes me uncomfortable to be silent, because my dad, my other members of the community have always been silent, and I think we need to have a voice. The South need to have a voice. We need to recenter the South as part of it, and make sure that we have different centers. We have centers of Rabat, centers of Casablanca. Tata can be also a center. Tata cannot be a margin. I think that's where I come from. But that doesn't mean that Tata negates the other places. It means that Tata also is part of this collective, integrated national puzzle that allows children from Tata to go to M6 Polytechnique, l'UR, Al-Akhawain, and so on and so forth. And I think if we engage in these projects, we're able to basically produce a model that Andre and Neila and other people are trying to think about, this place of convivialité and convivencia. Because if we don't do that, then we're allowing, just like what the conversation that's going on in Morocco at some moment, which also makes me uncomfortable, is that we're talking about two levels of how we talk about Jews. There's a level of racism sometimes, and there is a level of philo-Semitism sometimes. So we use the Jews as a model minority, sometimes are foregrounded and backgrounded depending on how we meet them. And I think that could be also blacks, that could be other people. And as politicians, this is a call to politicians and to educators. This is where we get into schools. Schools are important to deal with these questions. And Moroccans have the right and have the power, Moroccan scholars have the power to actually start and talk about these issues, because we can contribute also something. Instead of allowing conversations coming from the outside, we can have this conversation by putting in our textbooks material that comes from our history, and by going back to history, and this is where the historical anthropologist comes in, is that we're reading the present by always going back to the past and back and forth. And in that sense, we will be able to create a responsible citizen of the world. Thank you.
قبل ما تخرجوا ما تنساوش تابعونا في 20 فبراير وتابعونا على المواقع التواصل الاجتماعي.